Right. So Module 1B is actually a tutorial that is not a tutorial associated with any assignment. It is a tutorial more or less prepare you for the next few assignments. And the reason being that in this particular tutorial, I try to introduce some of the technology feature that we're using in this particular course, including different server and how do you differentiate with each other. And this actually we discussed already, not completely, but in a different way last week. So it involved the 18C server that we try to cover on the virtual desktop, and also the 12, this is 18C, and also 12C server that we use on the oracle.us.edu or USACAD server. So that's the two pretty much environment we have internally at UIS that we can use. And also we introduce something that um, using the remote system, that's the APAC system. There's some other tutorial, slide I will not go through in detail because that's not there's no assignment associated with it. And going through this, for example, learning or understanding what is a listener will give you a more detailed knowledge about the Oracle system in this case, but that's not our focus here. Our focus here in 1B or module 1A to 1C is to get you started with the process of data analytic ETL process or project process. So the process start by getting data from a data source. So you're grabbing data from some sort of data source. And the data source can be as simple as an Excel file to a large database to a cloud database to a very unorganized NoSQL database, right? So it could be any one of the above, or sometimes you need to combine them together. So the fundamental knowledge is that you have to learn the SQL statement. So module 1B is trying to capturing a few slides from your textbook slide so that you can kind of going back and forth. But I did not capture everything because that would be redundant. So to use module 1B, you need to use the textbook slide, and this is a chapter 2 part 1 slide as well as a facilitating tool for your learning. And this chapter 2 is pretty much a complete tutorial about the SQL select statement. And I'll explain what select statement is in the next few slides here. But basically, select statement is one important part of the SQL language, and that is one I want you to take away, regardless of what you forget after you've taken this class. Regardless you're getting an A or B, that you will remember you have done select, because that will be the thing that even as a business professional you need to know in the future. I believe that's at least from my perspective. So it's about learning the SQL language, and if you go into the textbook or the slide here, you will learn a little bit about the history of the SQL language and exactly what SQL language is all about. It's not a programming language, so it's not as complicated or threatening, let's put it that way, in learning in terms of learning a computer language. It is, however, a pretty comprehensive language. So it's not programming language, but it is very comprehensive, that give you almost close to a regular programming language power. So, and there are some terminology here, say for example DDL, DML, SQL, PSM, TCL, DCL, all these acronyms that you see here. And those are good exam material. And sometimes in a working environment, people use this to make them feel like they are professional, right? So I'm not very really sticking to those terminology. But again, this is the thing that when you pick up, you become part of the community, IT professional. You can speak the language. So this will show up in your your exam as a test to see if you capture those language. And the select statement is actually something what we consider as data manipulation language statement. So this is something we're manipulating data. Actually, in specific function way, we are retrieving data, right? So we're retrieving data from a particular database. So I'll skip from the introduction of different kind of statement. Because those I believe you can read the slide without any problem. And you can probably read even better than I do. So select statement of the structure, the basic structure is very simple. It's 4 important keywords combined with probably 3-4 other keywords. And later when you learn SQL function, and that's all you need to know about SQL. But SQL select statement can be very complicated when it is nested. And when I say nested, we will see probably at the end of chapter 2 or so, they will see some nested SQL statement. That make the SQL a little bit complicated. Nested SQL statement is very similar to the idea of looping in regular programming. So you create something in an inner loop and generate a result. The result from inner loop will be submitted to the outer loop. Outer loop will do processing and probably submit again the result. So that's where the complexity is coming from. But the basic format is actually very simple. Select from a table, select something from a table, and where that's all. And in data science or data analytics, there is a jargon. The jargon we call slice and dice. Slice and dice are both verb. One is kind of, both of them mean that you're chopping food or vegetable or meat. But one is horizontally, the other is kind of vertically in the context of database. So basically, the select statement is we try to take a table, right? Take a table. Let's see if I can identify a table. So this is a table. So you look at the table, there are 2 dimensions, right? One dimension are the columns. So in this case, there are 4 columns, including the number will be 5 columns. So there are 4 columns on this table. And there are rows and columns and rows. So when we say slice, we are trying to slice vertically, and that is actually select column. So the first keyword, the select statement, is actually doing the slice. You are limited how many columns you're going to be. You're not going to be taking the entire table most of the time. You're slicing the column to select the column you want to maintain or retrieve from this particular task. And where statement, right? So the where statement, the second where statement is the dice. The dice is cutting the table horizontally, which means that you're going to be selecting different rows from the table. So one is selecting a column using a select phrase. One is selecting a row using a where phrase. So using a vertical and horizontal, you can pinpoint a section or multiple sections of a table and retrieve that data. So that's the whole operation here. So select statement is slice and dice. And slice and dice has a different meaning in different places. It is also used in spreadsheet environment. Spreadsheet environment, we usually call this a filter. So if you use filter, and filter is your where statement. And when you hide or reveal column is your select statement. So they're essentially the same thing, but database world, in the database world, it's more structured. And it can handle much more complicated structure than the spreadsheet. So that's the main difference. All right. So any thought and comments until now? Keep the question into the chatting room if you have any, and now I'll go respond to you. I do have double 2 screen, so I can see your response from one screen while I'm presenting the information from the main screen. All right. So to prepare you learning chapter number 2, and the first thing you need to do is to get your data ready. And that is what assignment 2 is all about. So assignment 2 asks you to restore data set. And the environment I recommend to learn this chapter 2 select statement is either in the, actually, I should not say either. It should be in both the University of Arkansas environment as well as in the Apex environment. So I'm in the browser. So I will log into both systems using the same browser in two different tabs. And we'll go back and forth and tell you what I mean by that. For unknown reason, today I accidentally switched my Chrome background to a dark background, probably because I was watching Star Wars, and my force turned dark, so I kind of switched to dark. But it should represent the same interface. Let me see. Okay. Yeah, I'm wearing my glasses now, so when I type, I cannot see the keyboard. It slows me down a little bit. So on both systems, I have already loaded the database already. And I will start with the University of Arkansas system to show you where the database is. And we did this actually last week in another tutorial. So I'll start the SQL Server tutorial, SQL Server Management Studio from the more traditional way by looking and find the SQL Server Studio from the, which is not very efficient, so from the menu selection. So I'm starting the SQL Server Management Studio here, and supposedly it should make a new connection. I will make the new connection here. Oh, did I open the wrong thing? Oh, this is the server profile. Wrong thing. Let me open that again. Server Management Studio. Okay. So now this is the correct one. So make sure you have the correct server name here, and we're going to be making the connection. And these I go through very quickly. And the reason I recommend you to do in these two environments is once your data is restored to these two environments, they will not vanish. The virtual desktop is great, but the only problem with the virtual desktop is every day when you start using virtual desktop, the virtual desktop will be reset at midnight of every day. So after midnight, the work you created in the virtual desktop will be wiped out and restored to the original condition. The data you uploaded to the UIS Oracle server, that will be there. But in order to avoid confusion, especially in the earlier stage of our class, I would recommend that using your University of Arkansas account if you have gone through assignment 3 already, or using Oracle Application Express interface, and both interface or both environment will keep your data in the Oracle database correspondingly. So I will go find my database here. It's ESA 313150 in my case. So this will be the database corresponding to your account that I emailed to you through the inbox from Canvas system. ESA. So as you can probably see, our class will start from ESA 313101 to 313150, and 313150 is the instructor's account. That's the account I have. So in the SQL Server environment, you should be able to see the database table showing up under the table tab under your account. Right? If you try to click on other account, you will not be able to see them. It will be denied access. And one of the interesting questions you might ask is, if I do not have access to those database, why would I be able to see them? Right? And this question you have to ask Microsoft. This is their system problem. That's actually, if you are a Microsoft system user, you know that. Well, I believe many of you have that experience. You go to the Windows environment, you go to the network neighborhood, you can see many computer in your neighborhood if you enable the sharing feature on your computer, but you cannot access them. Right? So that's pretty much the same thing here. So when they are designing a network protocol, there are certain way that, and actually I'm actually a certified Windows 2000 administrator, and I know there is a way to hide those on friend or redundant user or redundant database, but it requires writing a script, more like a small program. So most of the administrator will tend not to do that. Right? So anyway, so we have this table here. So you're supposed to have 5 tables. I believe one of the table is empty, right? But there are 4 tables populated with data. So what you need to do is that you need to start a new query by clicking on this new query. And we did this also last week, but we did not do this from the learning perspective. So once you have this query ready here, you can start going back to your slide and try to follow the slide and go step by step and learn the table and how they look like. So in this case that we are selecting the first slide teaching you how to use a select statement. You are selecting from a table called SKU data, and there is no where statement. And when you do not have where statement, you are saying I'm selecting all the rows, so there's no dice. There are only slice in our operation. So we're selecting 4 columns from the SKU data. So I cannot remember all the SQL, but let me just try to type everything here. You can try to type. I know the font size is very small, but you can, when you don't know what to type, you can always go back to the slide to look at your original query. So we're selecting, in this case, if you don't know what to do in most of the SQL environment, we are selecting from the SKU data, and we're looking at what option can we have in terms of a selection. So in this case, I'm selecting the SKU. I will not type in the exact. And when you start typing, you see that there are hint giving you that from the information I'm typing in. You can select say by department. I'm skipping one column and select a buyer. Right, so I'm selecting 3 columns instead of 4, and you can use from statement. And as you probably can also notice that the keywords in SQL language will show up as blue. And the other thing for the new learner to SQL language is what I'm doing here is every time I see a keyword, I switch line. I press return and go to the next line. In SQL statement, actually, it really doesn't matter if you switch line or not. You can write the entire SQL in one line as long as your editors and environment allow allow you to type. Right. So I can write this in line from this table called SKU data. Right. You can type directly the query and put a semicolon to signify or to show that it's the end of a statement. So that will be a complete SQL statement already. Select everything, not everything, 3 columns from the table called SKU data. Right. Or you can move them into several different line, but also, and the system will only recognize the semicolon as the end. So as long as you can separate the words using either space or using line return, and both of them are fine for and put them into separate line has an advantage, especially for new learner. When you are new to the SQL language, this structure will make you see the language much easier, right, to understand what the language is trying to tell you. Right, so this is the language. In this environment, you can write multiple language, multiple statement here. And when you write multiple statement, this particular environment become a script, right? So, and when you have a script, you will execute multiple statements here. So you can actually continue writing, and it become more or less like a program or like a macro, sort of like a recorder for the job you try to complete or do in the process of getting there. So once you have done that, and you can execute the data, and the result will show up at the lower part of the screen. So you have three columns selected, and we have only a row of data. So that's all we have from this data set that I have on my system. And the other thing that can facilitate you to work on the SQL statement and is a lot of time you will create some problem when you type the table names or column name. And in SQL Studio, Management Studio environment, one of the neat features is that you can, and all these tables or items are organized in something what we call database object. So you have this DBO in front of the table name. In order to avoid spelling error, you can also drag whatever the object you want to select or type directly into your statement. So in this case, I drag the dbo.sku data table, drop that directly into my query, and that will give you some sort of like a programming. This is actually object. This is called object control language. Object control language is structure of the data specification. So we have this table. It's a database object. It's a table object on the database. Right. So that will and help you to avoid. And also earlier you already see that when you are typing the column name, the SQL Management Studio will also help you to or give you some facilitation, and sort of like a semi-smart feature that you can make sure that you do not type the name of the column incorrectly, right? So those are some of the features. Some of the advanced features of SQL Management Studio, there is something called the SQL Builder, right? Sure, go ahead. Okay, so the SQL statement is not case sensitive, but it is case sensitive inside the quotation. Okay, so in here you don't see any quotation here, so you can write uppercase or lowercase for everything you see on the screen, or a mixing of uppercase and lowercase. It doesn't matter, right? This is the default setting. Some database management system, including Oracle and the SQL Server, you can change the setting to become case sensitive. Right? Case sensitive can increase the security of your database. But the default setting for the SQL language is, other than the thing you see later in quotation mark, single or double quotation. If the keywords or column name or table name, they are not in quotation, it's not case sensitive. I don't know if I make myself clear, but right. So in here, this example, it's not. You can write everything lowercase, uppercase, doesn't matter as long as each character is presented here in the right sequence. They are correct. Right. Very good question and observation here. Right. So that's how you enter the SQL statement in the Microsoft environment. In Oracle environment, right, things is a little bit different, and I use this called the Apex environment, and this will look not exactly the same, but similar in the SQL developer environment that we have done last week already. And they have a similar, what do you call this, user interface. It looked different, but it's actually the same label. In the Apex environment, the data manipulation language can be used in the SQL workshop. So we're going to be going into SQL workshop. And SQL Workshop is almost like a broader copy of the SQL Developer that we use in the virtual desktop. And among this SQL Workshop environment, there is a tab or tiles called Object Browser. This Object Browser is where you can see your database object. So in this case, you see that I have inventory table, member index. Member index is from your assignment number 3. And you have order items, you have retail order, sales, and we are looking at the SKU data. So when you go into SKU data, what you are presented here with is a interface we call the metadata. That is a definition of your SKU data table. So this is basically says SKU data table has the following 4 columns: SKU description. Each column has their data type and their property, they're nullable or not. And the actual data is actually showing up on the tab, and there are a lot of tabs on this interface. This is probably the place a new Oracle student will get confused, because a lot of times you cannot see a thing because they are hidden in a tab, and their tab is not as clear as the window tab that you see in your window environment. So this is the data tab. This is the index tab. If you go to data tab, you see the data, the complete table. And we have only a row of data, so that's all you see. If there are more, you can scroll down the screen and look at all the data. So this is Object Browser. It's the first place you want to go to make sure you have table, to make sure your data is there. If you come here, you don't see any data, don't see any table, you may be using the wrong account, or there might be some problem happen to your account. Right? So that's make sure the data is there. If there are no data, doesn't matter what query you enter, nothing will come out. Then the query will be issued under this. Let me go back again. Tiles called SQL command. Right? Command is command line. Means command line. So this is where we type our SQL statement. So using the same, try to move my cursor there. Select SKU. In this case, that we do not have a support. I mean, this is the web interface. So a lot of time, web interface has more limited feature here. So this is you have to remember the table name. Let's try SKU and forgot which one is the other one is, but I'm just putting one there from the SKU data, right? And put a semicolon in there, and you can after you finish the query here, you can now run the query, and the result will show up at the bottom of it. In this case, I have only one column, so this is the result that you see at the lower part of the computer screen here. Right? So that is the Oracle Apex environment, and both environment they can perform the similar job in different way. In the SQL Server or in the Oracle environment, if you want to write a complete script or more than one statement, you have to use this feature called the SQL script environment, and this is the place that we have from tutorial 1A that you actually run, recreate the data set in this environment. So these are the environment that we have, and there are also some utility here, and later we're going to be using here in our exercise. There's something called a smart tool. Say for example, called a quick SQL builder, and this will be very useful when you are working and you forgot about how to write a proper SQL statement. And as a IT professional, you cannot tell people that I don't know how to write SQL, but you can always go use a easier to use tool to write SQL for you. So this is more like a robot assisted SQL writing. It has similar feature like what you see in the Microsoft environment, right? So that's the starting point of using SQL and I mean using two environment to start learning chapter two. And I'll stop the first segment of recording here. Sure. It not really matter, right? So that just give you some uh, 95% answer. Not really matter. For example, in this query, if I put a space here, put a space here, put a space here, right, and I execute it, you will still get a result, right? So it's not that, uh, but you know, of course, if you put a space here between S and K, you'll get error message because that's totally a change the name of the column, right? But yes, that's also a very good question here. Is that extra space will not hurt your statement here, right? So if you put another space here, uh, it will still work. So I have two space in front of the table, it still works. So space doesn't really hurt the structure of the SQL statement. Yeah, very good. Okay, so I'm going to be stopping this segment and we'll start another recording and try to keep every segment around 30 minutes or so.